How's it going, everybody? You know who it is. My name is Sanwoo, and in today's video we are going to take a look at the LFO types inside the OP-1 field. First off, a super quick explanation of what an LFO is. I always describe it as an invisible hand that turns a knob for you when you are busy playing the keyboard. So let's start with the most simple LFO. The LFO can be accessed on page number 4 of the synth engine. If you want to change your LFO type, you can press Shift and 4 and it gives you a list of different LFO options. For now, we're going to go with value because this is the most simple, and with this we can explain the more complicated ones later on. So let's select value. As I already said, the LFO is like an invisible hand turning a knob for us. For now, I'm going to turn the LFO off and go to the synthesizer page. If I play a chord and turn this knob, it will change the sound while I'm playing. But what if I play it, say, with both hands? It will be quite difficult to turn this knob unless my toes are very flexible. So now I want to automate this movement while I'm playing the sounds. I go to my LFO, make sure it's turned on. And now I can select the destination for this LFO using these two knobs right here. The gray one selects the destination page of our LFO, meaning the synthesizer page, which is page number 1. And then I have the envelope page, which is page number 2, so I could modulate anything on this page. And I've got the effects page, which is page number 3. As you can already see, the distance is being modulated here. So for now, let's turn this back to the synthesizer page. And now we're going to be modulating this parameter right here, as you can see. And we can decide which parameter we are modulating, as it says here, with the red knob. So I can scroll through the different knob colors. So the blue knob on the first page is the waveform. That's why it says wave there. If I turn it further, it's the stereo spread parameter, the beige knob, as you can see, stereo, and so on and so forth. Cutoff frequency, or filter frequency as it's called here, and resonance finally with the red knob. So we can choose any of the 4 parameters that are available on the synthesizer page. And that would be the same for the envelope page. So I have attack, decay, sustain, and release that can be modulated. And again, same for the effects page. I've got the distance, I've got the gate right here, I've got the color, and so on and so forth. But again, let's turn it back to the synthesizer and to the waveform modulation. And now let's have a look at these parameters right here. First of all, the blue parameter is the speed of the modulation. So if I've turned it to 1, for example, and I head over to this page and play some keys, you can see the modulation is very slow. And if I turn it up, and even higher, the modulation becomes very fast. Let's turn it back to 4 in order to better show the next parameter right here. The amount determines how far our signal is being modulated. So if I turned it to 0, there's almost no modulation going on right now. And as I increase it, the modulation goes further and even further, until it goes completely from one end to the other. So you can easily dial in some subtle modulation that brings some more interesting movement to your sound, but doesn't get too harsh for the listener or too noticeable. Furthermore, it's important to note that the tempo indicated by numbers is synced to the tempo of your project, so the tempo that you've set in this menu right here, whereas the tempo over here is not synchronized to your project tempo. So these are free running LFOs that don't correlate with whatever is going on in your project. So it goes from low speed to high speed on the left, that is tempo synced. And then from low speed to high speed on the right without being synced to your project tempo. Another function of the blue knob is the selection of a waveform. So right now we have it set to sine wave, which means that the modulation goes smoothly up and down. But if we first turn this up a little bit and then click the blue encoder once, we can set it to a square wave, and that means it will jump between the minimum and maximum value. As you can see, nothing smooth about that. If we click it again, we have a saw wave going up, ramp up. So it goes up and then immediately drops down to the minimum value, and the other way around. And finally, back to the sine wave. Now that that's covered, we can discuss the difference between this option and this option. As I said before, this means we are affecting the synthesizer page, and we are affecting it in such a way that the movement that you'll see whenever I press a key will always start from the 0 position. Meaning, if we get this little sine wave here, it will always start right here. So whenever I press a key, the movement will start here and then go along this line. However, if I set it to this option right here, and I press the key repeatedly, the movement will start at a different place in the cycle of this oscillator. So it might start here, it might start here, it might start there. It's still covering the same distance of movement, just where it starts is different because in the background, this oscillator keeps oscillating, whereas on this option here, it always restarts when I press a key. So the movement is the same width, like this. Just where it starts is different on either of the options. All right, let's move on to another LFO type and go to the element LFO. And maybe also select a different synth engine just to keep it interesting. As you can already tell, this looks very similar to the value LFO. These parameters are basically the same, apart from this one not having the free running option. But the blue knob right here has a very different function than on the value LFO, because the element LFO doesn't have a waveform running in the background. Rather, it takes some information that you put into it and converts it into a knob movement. For example, it can take the information from your microphone, from your amplitude envelope, so this one right here, or from the master output volume, and then it converts it into the movement of a certain knob. Let's start with the amplitude envelope, because I think that's the easiest one to explain. First, I quickly turn the LFO off and show you what the sound sounds like without the modulation. And now I want to modulate this parameter right here. So you can clearly hear when there's a change happening. Now I go to my LFO again, turn it on, and select the red parameter of the synth engine. And the way this works is that now the knob movement of the red parameter is directly linked to my amplitude envelope. That means as my volume goes up, so will this parameter go up in value. So if I have an immediate attack, it will be grainy immediately because the red parameter is turned up immediately. But if I have a slower attack, for example, not only does my volume fade in slower, but also the value of the red parameter will be faded in slowly. And this gets especially interesting when you consider that you can modulate the parameters also in a negative amount. That means as my volume of the sound goes up, I can reduce another parameter. So if I start out by making this parameter quite high, that means as my volume goes up, the graininess will be reduced. So let's check that out. And of course, you can adjust it to taste. And I think this negative modulation is a really nice way to create texture in your sound this way without it being overbearing to the listener, because as you're increasing the volume, you're not also increasing the distortion or the harshness of your sound. So this is a really nice way of using this envelope as a source. So let's move on to the other sources. We've got the microphone right here. So this will take whichever input you have selected for your audio input and convert that into the LFO data. So right now I'm still on a negative amount, and that means if I play a sound in the beginning, it will still be harsh. But as I tap the microphone and increase the microphone's volume, I can turn down the harshness manually. And as you can tell, this is really cool for doing some live modulation and getting some organic modulation, because it will also react to the way you are speaking. If you turn the microphone volume up a little bit, you'll see that it'll be affected by the way I'm talking when I play a note. La, 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 or whatever other audio source you have available. Then we've got the sum as a source, and that means it takes your output signal of the OP-1 and applies this to the modulation. So same as the microphone, just that it takes the audio output. And we can use this, for example, with effects quite effectively. Spring reverb right here. And I turn the mix up and make this all as loud as possible. And now I'm going to set this to effect and to the send parameter, so this one here. So as the sound or the volume of the main output goes up, the mix of the spring reverb will be reduced. And of course, we could assign it to any other parameter of the spring reverb. For example, I could increase the damping parameter, which will also lower the sound of that spring reverb. And let's hear what it sounds like again without the LFO. You can hear a lot harsher because there's just so much going on, and the spring reverb can get over the top quite easily. So this is an easy way of taming the spring reverb. And finally, we've got the G-force sensor as a source for our LFO. I'm going to demonstrate that using some drums here. Let's go to the element and select this. And I'm going to set it to the pitch parameter of our drums. All right, and now I'm going to turn the OP-1. And as you can hear, the pitch of the sound changes, and depending on how far you take the modulation, a lesser movement will have more of an impact. All right, back to the synth, and let's check out another LFO type. This time we're going to try out the Tremolo LFO. This LFO looks slightly different from the previous ones, and that's because we've got two different destinations, one being the pitch, controlled by the beige parameter, and 1 being the volume controlled by the grade parameter. Same as with the value LFO, we've got a speed parameter here on the left, controlled by blue. And it can also go into non-synchronized values again. But let's keep it synchronized. A new feature in this LFO is that it has an envelope controlled by the red knob. In its neutral position, the modulation intensity will stay the same throughout the whole time. But as I turn the envelope counterclockwise, it will start at a lower intensity and then will increase in intensity. And as I turn it further, it will take longer to ramp up the intensity. And even longer. And if I turn it clockwise, it will do the opposite. It will start at full intensity and then slow down. And somewhat counterintuitively, as I turn it further, this ramping down will happen faster. Let's turn this back to neutral again. And the last function right here is changing the envelope shape. So right now it's a sine wave. If I press Shift and turn it, we can change it to a ramp. We can change it to a, what is it, an exponential curve, I think. And then we've got a square wave. So it just goes back in between the maximum and minimum value, or minimum and maximum, however you want. And then we've got the pulse width, or just a little burst, so it shoots up to the modulation only for a tiny amount of time. So you can hear it's just a little bit of a clicky sound that I can increase in time. And that's about it for the Tremolo LFO. Now we move on to the random LFO. As the name implies, this LFO chooses random values that are within a certain range that we give it, chosen by the amount parameter, rather than going in a smooth fashion of a sine wave between minimum and maximum values. One standout feature of the random LFO is that we can not only select the normal parameters on every page like we could before, but we can also select all parameters on a given page. So the synth page right here, we have now selected every parameter and we can modulate every parameter on this page with the random LFO. Let's turn the amount up a little bit and play something. And you can see all these parameters change wildly. And of course, we can also increase the speed of that. So you can get crazy modulation going and completely change your sound the whole time, but you don't have to take it too far to the extreme by turning your amount all the way up. But you can also do it subtly. Say, for example, get your sound dialed in without the LFO first, how you like it. And then turn on the LFO at a very low amount. And you already get a lot more movement in your sound. And again, if you turn it up too far, it's gonna go crazy. And same as on the Tremolo LFO, you've got an envelope with which you can fade in the amount of modulation. Or a shorter fade in. You can keep it steady. Or fade it out over time. And next up, we've got the velocity LFO. Actually, let's use this on some drums. First of all, I need to make sure that I have velocity activated in the menu. I'll set it to soft. And now, as you can see, my drum page is affected, meaning the first page of my drum engine is being affected by this LFO. And the parameter I've selected is the pitch. So that means as my velocity increases, so will the pitch of a sound. So if I play it at a low velocity, it's low in pitch. And if I play it with a hard velocity, the pitch will increase. And of course, the higher I make the amount, the more the pitch will jump up. If I turn it down, the difference between the minimum pitch and maximum pitch will not be as high. And another cool thing about the velocity LFO is that we can change how much the volume of our sound responds to the velocity with which we press the key. I turn the pitch change off for now, and you'll notice that if I press this lightly, the volume is low, and if I press it harder, the volume is high. And we can change this, so if I turn it all the way down, there's no difference between light press and a hard press. But as we increase it, the difference will be more obvious. Not so much yet, but as we increase it further. And at 100, we have a maximum difference between minimum velocity in volume and maximum velocity in volume. And where this is really cool is if you want to influence a parameter of a sound, as the pitch, for example, now, but you don't want to impact the volume of the sound so much with your velocity. So now at low velocity, volume, same intensity, but the pitch is low. And if I press it harder, the volume is still the same, but the pitch goes up. So you can find the sweet spot between modulating your parameter and modulating your volume with this LFO. And finally, we get to our last LFO, which is the MIDI LFO. And for this, I'm gonna get my OP-Z out and connect it up to the OP-1. Turn it on. And of course, then I have to make sure in the MIDI menu that I have the correct MIDI channel selected. So right now I'm sending and receiving on MIDI channel 1, and I'll turn notes to both and other to both. So I make sure that I'm receiving MIDI CC messages from the OP-Z. So now the OP-1 field is receiving MIDI CC messages 1 through 4 and sending them all to the same parameter right now, which is on the drum page, the blue parameter. Let's change the parameter colors down here. We can do this by turning this one for channel number 1. And I'll set it to this parameter. Channel number 2 on this knob. Channel number 3 right here. And channel number 4. We can also select the page we want to send it to, so the parameter page, by pressing Shift and then turning a knob like this one. But actually I want to keep it on the drum synth page. So now we are affecting all the knob colors, these right here, with their shift function. So if I press Shift on this page, I'm affecting this, 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 and this. And now I can use my MIDI controller, sending MIDI CC 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order to affect these parameters, which might not be visible on here, but it is happening and you'll hear it. which in this case is actually pretty cool, because if you want to do sound design on the D-Box engine or the D-Synth, you have to switch between pressing Shift and turning the encoders and just turning the encoders all the time. So this way you could do sound design and affect all the parameters without having to press Shift. And that's it for this tutorial on the OP-1's LFOs. If you want to learn more about the OP-1 field, check the playlist over there or contact me for private online lessons, link down in the description. Other than that, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would appreciate a like, a comment down below, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the next video. I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have a wonderful time. Peace.